Hey everyone, thanks for joining us today. This is Tuesday, October 12th for our October edition of What Are You Reading? I'm here with several of our incredible librarians at our different branches, and we're going to talk about what they've been up to, what they've been reading, books that they recommend. And if you are watching this live with us, then I encourage you to leave us a comment. Let us know what you're reading, or let us know what you think of the books that we talk about. And if you're not watching this live, do the same anyway so we can see your comments later. With that being said, we'll get started soon. Actually, before we get started, let me talk about one thing really quick. This Thursday at 6 p.m., we have another author talk scheduled that'll be here on Facebook and YouTube and on our website, which is The Witch of Delray by author Fiona Davis, who I'll be speaking to later to work out the details. You can also join us on Zoom if you go to our website, thegdl.org, and go to /events. You can see on our calendar. You can sign up for a Zoom link there, and you can ask the author your own questions about the book. So I'm excited for that. Join us here. Again, that will be Thursday at 6 p.m., this upcoming Thursday. All right. With that being said, we get started at the top of the list. Sherry, do you want to start us off this month?
Sure. The first one I want to talk about is The Address by Fiona Davis. It's historical fiction, and I get asked a lot for historical fiction that is not about World War II, because we all know there is a ton of historical fiction about World War II, and this one is not at all about World War II. Fiona Davis writes, it's not really a series because they don't have the same characters, but it is... She always writes about a New York landmark. In this case, it's the Dakota apartment building. Most of you might know it as the place where John Lennon was shot. And it has a dual storyline. So it starts in 1985 with a woman named Bailey who is fresh out of rehab. She's lost her job. She doesn't have a place to live. So she ends up staying at the Dakota working as a designer for her cousin, who is basically ruining the place with her 80s decor. And she comes upon a family mystery. So that takes us back to like the late 1800s. They know there was a murder in the apartment building. Theodore Camden was stabbed to death by a woman named Sarah Smythe, who had spent some time in a mental institution. But Bailey starts to delve into that mystery, and it becomes clear there's a little more to it than that. So you get the building of the Dakota and the beginning of it, and there's a whole mystery that goes on. So it's not just for historical fiction lovers. I would think anyone who likes a good mystery would also enjoy this one. Ryan, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
When I was putting the artwork together, I'm sorry, I was saying in my mind I misread the author's name as Viola Davis, and I thought that was interesting that she was writing a novel. But I think it's neat. You always have really great historical fiction recommendations, Sherry. So thank you for that. Chris, what would you like to talk about?
Sure. I will just bounce on Sherry's real quick because I did read the address a while back now, and I agree is a really kind of interesting and fun, not fun, but interesting historical novel to read. I'm going to talk about Prairie Lotus by Linda Sue Park. I didn't realize when I selected this book that it would be so close to Indigenous Peoples Day. So I'm glad that I'm actually getting a chance to talk about it today. This is the story of Hannah. She's a half Asian girl living on the prairie with her dad in the 1880s. It's a very good story that presents another viewpoint about life on the prairie in the 1800s. One thing that's really important for readers to understand is that Linda Sue Park chose to write the Prairie Lotus story because of all the controversy surrounding the Laura Ingalls Wilder books. And she thought it was important to keep the integrity of that time period, but provide an alternate viewpoint of this half Asian girl and her family. So I really love the story. I really liked how Hannah perseveres during times of turmoil. She has multiple times throughout the story where she's either facing a bully or facing discrimination. I know it sounds really heavy, but it didn't feel heavy when I was reading it. If you like the Little House on the Prairie stories, I promise you, you'll like this. There's, talk about the one-room school. There's talk about the Native Americans and when she runs into them on the plains and how they communicate with each other or try to communicate, which they do in the book, and it's successful. So I would really strongly recommend this to anybody who's interested, either because of the Laura Ingalls Wilder controversy, or if you just like to read stories for kids. This is a junior fiction novel. Yeah, I can't hear you either. Can you hear me?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, we'll figure out what the issue is. I have to change something. But Nancy, if you want to talk about our next book, I'll work on our technical issues here.
Okay, I'm going to talk about Ophi's Ghosts, and this book came out in May of this year, so you can probably get it at the library without waiting for a hold. It's junior fiction by Justina Ireland, and I loved it. I love anything ghosty or witchy. This little girl grows up in the Georgia countryside, and her father is frantically waving to her and trying to get a message to her that her and her mother need to hide immediately. And she does not realize, she only realizes later that he is a ghost at that time. Something bad happened and her dad is telling her to hide with her mother. So she takes her mother, they run into the woods and they do get away. She still doesn't realize, though, that her father was a ghost at that time, and she doesn't realize that she can see ghosts. So they moved to town in Pittsburgh. So it's a whole different scene than she's used to. And they're living in a big house. Her mother's a maid, and she gets Ophi a job as a maid. And she's just a little girl. I think maybe she's around 10, but she's already working as a servant in this large house. And the story progresses. There are 2 murder mysteries that Ophi's able to solve because she can see ghosts. And she finally finds some information from relatives to help her understand this talent of hers and use in a way that's helpful. Anytime I read a book like this, I can't imagine what it would be like to see ghosts. And sometimes she sees them the way they looked when they were killed. So it can be disturbing. So I always am glad that I don't have that skill. But it's junior fiction. It's a real quick read, and it's a fun read. And also for kids of that age, it really shows pronounced racism and the structure back then of the servants in the household. And it kind of gives you something to think about as far as the way people were treated in that era. So it was a very good, quick read.
All right. I think you can hear me, right?
Yes.
All right. Thank you, Nancy. Kristen, what do you want to talk about first?
Okay, I'm going to talk about The Glass Hotel by Emily St. John Mandel. It's also a book that deals with ghosts, but in a different way. And if you're not familiar with Emily St. John Mandel, she wrote Station 11, which was a Michigan Reads book not too long ago, like The Women of the Copper Country. So in this book, it's very different than from Station 11. There are multiple viewpoints, which is kind of her style, Emily St. John Mandel's style. In this book, we are dealing with Vincent, who is a bartender at this hotel on Vancouver Island. She is named after a poet, and she has her brother who also works at the hotel. And this book kind of starts off with this scandal of somebody writing on the lobby's glass wall, "Why don't you swallow broken glass?" And then the book kind of goes from there. And on that same night, Vincent meets Jonathan Alcaides, who is the owner of the hotel, and he's also this guy from New York, and he's rich and he's in corporate, but also he's running an international Ponzi scheme, and he moves money from clients' accounts into money. We'll say that very loosely because it's not real. So then when the financial empire collapses, just like in real life, Bernie Madoff, which actually Emily St. John Mandel uses as her inspiration, the Madoff Ponzi scheme for inspiration for her book. Jonathan Alcaides, his Ponzi scheme also collapses, and the book is kind of about like all of the different lives that are kind of touched by this Ponzi scheme, including Vincent, who had been posing as Jonathan's wife, but they weren't actually married, and also all of these other victims of the fraud that were kind of touched by this scheme, and then a victim of the fraud is just then later hired to investigate a strange occurrence, which is a woman vanishes from the deck of a container ship between ports of call. So we have all of these different scenarios happening, all these different viewpoints, but overall the book is just really it kind of starts out slow, but it's just really interesting and just really I couldn't put it down. We actually read this for our Flushing Book Club last month. It was our first time meeting in person since the pandemic all started. And I think it was a really great book for discussion because there was just so much going on, but it didn't seem confusing. It just seemed like it kind of flowed really well together. I really like her writing style. So I really, I recommend it. It's just a really good, interesting book.
I really like books that have different perspectives and point of views as books to discuss and talk about, because I think that brings up a lot to discuss. I also think Ponzi schemes are really interesting, so I feel like that could make it'd be a really interesting book. It sounds really interesting.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks for sharing that with us, Kristen. Let's go back to Sherry. What is your other recommendation for today?
My second one is The Orphan Witch by Paige Crutcher. I believe it's a debut novel. Don't quote me on that. I might be wrong about that, but it felt like a debut. And it is a witchy story, obviously. You can tell by the title. But Persephone May is an orphan, and she has a lot of odd jobs because strange things seem to happen around her. People randomly walk into traffic if she makes eye contact with them. Weather changes, serious weather changes happen when she's around. So she doesn't have any friends or many friends. And she always keeps a bag packed because she never knows when she's going to need to take off so as not to draw so much attention to herself. And so she's working in a coffee shop, and she happens to accidentally make eye contact with a regular customer who almost walks into traffic, and then some other things happen, and she realizes she's going to need to take off again. So she gets an email from actually one friend that she's managed to keep over the years, her friend Hyacinth, who asks her to come and visit her on this mysterious island in North Carolina called Weil Isle. So she decides that's the perfect place to lay low. So she heads for Weil Isle. And as she gets closer, she realizes that it's enchanted. And then she also realizes that Hyacinth's cousin does not want her there. And then strange things start to happen around the isle. There really only seems to be 4 people living there year round. The rest are seasonal people. And she also runs into a man who can't seem to leave the place where he's working. And she comes to realize that her cousins actually need her to get rid of a curse that's occurred with the island. And so there's a lot going on. At times it can be confusing, I will warn you, but it was so good and perfect for this October season.
I have that in my stack.
It's a
What
good
I like
one.
a lot about your recommendation, Sherry, is I feel like they're usually like can fall into two groups, right? You have a lot of historical fiction, but you also consistently like a lot of these sort of like magic fantasy tales. Is there any connection between the two? Is there like a similar thread that goes between these two types of stories that you really enjoy, or just because how different they can kind of be?
I think it's because they're so different. To be fair, I would have told people maybe 4 or 5 years ago I didn't read historical fiction and I didn't read fantasy, but I guess my reading tastes have kind of changed.
That makes sense. And something I'll say on a comment that Kimberly has left on Facebook in this is that she said that she just won a full set of the Emily St. John Mandel books from the publisher, and she's looking forward to reading them. So that's really cool. Congratulations on that. And our fact checkers have told me that you were also correct, Sherry. The Orphan Witch is Paige Crutcher's debut novel, which I think Paige Crutcher sounds like Paige Crusher, which is probably a great name if you're an author. I like that a lot. All right. Chris, what do you want to talk about?
I'm going to talk about If the Creek Don't Rise by Leah Weiss. This is the Fenton Fiction Book Club's October novel, and we're going to talk about it tomorrow. I'm going to spoil a little sneak that I reached out to the author, and she has agreed to do a phone call with us tomorrow. So I will be putting her on speakerphone during book club tomorrow to speak with the author. So I'm pretty stoked about that, because how often do you get a author to visit your book club for free?
That's cool.
Yeah. So anyway, this story is set in Appalachia in 1970, specifically North Carolina. It's about Sadie Blue. She's a young teenager, and she's 15 days into a marriage with an abusive drunk. Her story is told in alternating chapters through different characters, and we get to know the characters through the stories that they're telling us about Sadie Blue. So while it's specifically Sadie Blue's story, you also are learning about the town and all the people who drive the town. The character development in this book is fantastic. By the end of it, I was hoping for more. I'm hoping the author will write additional stories about Aunt Maris, Miss Kate, Birdie, and Tattler. As I was reading the print version of this book, you can kind of see how many pages are left. I'm reading along, and I'm thinking I've got about 20 pages to read. And then I turn the page, and boom, that was the end of the book. I'm not going to give any spoilers about the ending. Let's just say, go out there, check this book out, and read it. You won't be disappointed.
That is a pretty hearty endorsement, and it's so exciting too that you get to hear from the author.
Yeah.
That's really exciting.
Yeah.
So let me know how that goes. I'm interested to hear. That's exciting for your book club. All right, Nancy, what do you want to talk about next?
Okay, I'm going to talk about a nonfiction book. I skip around a lot. I get bored. I don't get bored. I get saturated with the subjects, I think, when I read historical novels, because a lot of times it's in war times and they're sad. And then with the supernatural, sometimes there's not a whole lot of them around. You just quickly read them and go on to something else. So I read a lot of fiction, but I also pop over to nonfiction as well. So there's just no telling what I'll review. This one is called The Hummingbirds Gift, Wonder, Beauty, and Renewal on Wings by Cy Montgomery. And Cy Montgomery travels around and discovers interesting things that interest her and things that she'd like to learn about. She also wrote How to Be a Good Creature, a memoir in 13 animals, and The Soul of an Octopus, a surprising exploration into the wonder of consciousness. And I've got that one on my list to read next. This was a tiny, thin book, and it's so good. This lady that she visited rescues hummingbird babies, if you can imagine that. They're like the size of a bean. Their legs are like threads. And it's so interesting to me because I garden, and I specifically have planted a lot of things that will attract bees, butterflies, and hummingbirds. So I see them in my yard quite a bit. I'm not quite to the point where I put out feeders for them and observe their behavior or anything like that, but I just see them flitting back and forth in my yard, and I enjoy it. But to imagine one of their babies, and also to imagine how far they travel, it's just amazing. And she goes into depth with these two little infants that she rescues, and the amount of work, the incredible amount of work that it takes to get these little things from newborns to the point where they're flying around in her hummingbird garden, and then she can set them free. So I do kitten rescue, and I'll read anything about animals or rescue stories or the people who rescue. So this was just a cute little book that came through my library, and I grabbed it. And it did make me want to read The Soul of an Octopus next, because I guess people are discovering that they're really incredible, sensitive and intelligent creatures. So I'd like to read about them next.
Our Linden librarian, Katie, she has read The Soul of an Octopus. She really loves it. And I did a recording with her months ago where she talked about a few different book recommendations that were all like Netflix shows or things, and that was one of them. And I had that recording. I'm saving it in case for some reason we couldn't do What Are You Reading or something happened, but I'll probably get that up somewhere on our Facebook account soon for those who are interested.
Yes.
And then maybe if you want, you read it for next time. I'll attach Katie's review here. That would be kind of neat to see. All right, Kristen, what is your last book to talk about?
Okay, so I also have a nonfiction book, and it is How the Word is Passed, A Reckoning with the History of Slavery Across America by Clint Smith. This book was on the long list for the National Book Award for this year, 2021. And this book is very, I'm going to say it's very heavy, but it's very important. I think it's a really important book that I think everybody should read. So this book is told in different chapters based on the different places that the author went to look at the history of slavery and how people have kind of discussed it throughout history. And so like in the first chapter, he visits Monticello in Virginia, which is the estate where Thomas Jefferson wrote letters and like basically where he's like most well known for having been. And I think a lot of people don't realize that he had actually enslaved over 400 people there. So that whole chapter is about that, and about how a lot of people, like, you can go on tours there, and the tours there now include a tour about slavery and about how, and you can tour where the slaves were kept, and like where, all about how everything that happened there. And they kind of want to focus on that instead of just focusing on the house and the architecture. So there's that. There's also the story of the Whitney Plantation, which is in Louisiana, and it's one of the only former plantations that is devoted to preserving the experience of the enslaved people whose lives and work sustained it. So again, you think of plantations, and especially now, there's a lot of controversy with people getting married on plantations and the sensitivity around that. And I think with the Whitney Plantation, you're actually hearing about what really happened there. So again, you're getting more of the story. And then in the next chapter, he visits Angola, which is a prison in Louisiana, which is also a former plantation that is named for the country from which most of its enslaved people arrived from. and is also one of the most gruesome maximum security prisons in the world. Again, this is really heavy stuff, and I think it's something that we need to reckon with and confront as people in history, because it's not really, if you think about it, it wasn't really that long ago. And I think we really do need to think about it. Again, another chapter, he visits Blandford Cemetery, which is also in Virginia, and it is the final resting place of tens of thousands of Confederate soldiers. And this chapter was really interesting because Clint Smith is a Black man, and he visits this Confederate cemetery and also attends a Memorial Day celebration that is put on by the veterans of Sons of the Confederates. And that was an interesting chapter. Very interesting. He goes to Galveston in Texas and talks about Juneteenth. And he goes to Senegal. There's an island there where they believe that many of the slaves had been transferred, shipped from. And then he also goes to New York, which in Manhattan, there is a very big history of the trade, of where slave trade happens. And a lot of people don't know that. So again, it's just about confronting the history of slavery in America. And I really think that this book is just, I really think it was longlisted for the National Book Award for a reason. And it really sticks with you, like it's really sticking with me. And it's just really emotional and really, I just really recommend it for everybody. It's pretty long. It's around 300 some pages, but I think if you just take it chapter by chapter and just really let it sit with you, I think it's really good to do that. And I think this really nice review, summary. I'm sorry. It says it offers a new understanding of the hopeful role that memory and history can play in understanding our country. Maybe, yeah. But I think you should read it. Everybody should read it.
Yeah, like you said, it sounds very heavy, but also very important. About 6 years ago, I went to Monticello, and I took a tour there, and there was such an emphasis on the conditions that the slaves lived in, and that part I appreciated so much, and I found so interesting and enlightening. It's really great. I would like to I would be interested in the rest of the things they talk about in this book. This sounds very interesting.
Yeah, I haven't visited Monticello, but I think that might be a next trip that I go on. Definitely, because I think that it's important to just confront that and really learn more about it, because I think there's a lot of things that I didn't know about, especially in this book. And as somebody who wants to learn more and be more informed, I think that this is important to kind of visit some of these places and just learn more.
I agree.
All right. A couple more comments that we got in about Hummingbirds is Amanda Jo said that she gardens as well from time to time and likes to put out hummingbird feeders, and that the book sounded fantastic. And Kimberly mentioned that she watches bird cams and likes watching hummingbird cams. That's really neat.
Yeah, I'm going to do that.
Sounds like a good idea, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Do we want to talk about our last book then, Heartberries? I think there were some mixed opinions on it before the show. We picked a book we were all going to try to read at the last show, and that was Heartberries. Who would like to talk about it?
I'll start. It's a memoir about an Indigenous woman, and I get why people wouldn't like it. It does jump around. Her writing style is probably not for everyone. I like to look into her life. It's not a happy story, but I think it's important that we know that not everybody's story is a happy story. I kind of felt like the writing is a little similar to, and I finally remembered the title of it, On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous by Ocean Vuong. It's very kind of poetic, but also kind of disturbing at the same time. So I would kind of compare those two.
Any other thoughts anyone wants to share?
I will just
Oops.
go ahead.
We all want to share. I was just going to say, I read about her and her life as I was reading the book, and I don't think I would have gotten as much out of it to realize everything that she went through, because the book is disjointed. She's just kind of free writing in a notebook while she's in a mental institution. So, but her prose, her poetry, the way she wordsmiths is gorgeous. And I think if these were maybe written as poems, I would have liked it better. But her writing is just beautiful.
Kristen, what do you want to say?
Oh, I was going to say, I really liked it as well. And I think that she touches on some important issues, especially within the Indigenous community, with the missing and murdered Indigenous women, that it happens so often, and then just mental health issues and mental illness, and just a lot of trauma that Indigenous women deal with. And I think that maybe that's why her book feels so just disjointed, because maybe her life was just disjointed at the time and when she wrote it. And I don't know. I agree. I think obviously it's not for everybody. And I think, like we've discussed before, like it's like reading books and liking books is so subjective. And, like we discussed that in our book club too, because when we read Station 11, like not everybody liked it. Like I really loved it, but, I think one of our members of the book club, she says, well, maybe, like sometimes books aren't always for you. So like, I guess maybe if we think about that, but I don't know. I just I don't know. I really like this book, and I'm really glad that I read it. I'm glad that Sherry recommended it.
Anything you have to say, Chris?
So I'm the one who didn't like it at all. So it's probably good that I'm going last, because I'm that opposite of what everybody else said. I described it pre-show that it felt like a ping pong ball, just bouncing around from here to there. And I had a hard time trying to follow the sequencing in it. I also sought out, articles and Wikipedia entries and whatever to find out a little bit more about her, thinking that might help me read it. In the end, I found it entirely too depressing. And, to kind of touch on what Kristen said, sometimes, maybe it's a book I can come back to at another point in my life, but for that particular time period, I just couldn't read it.
Sure. I think it's understandable. I think that's, that is interesting about books. Well, in all media, right? Sometimes it's not everyone enjoys everything. And I also think you can also appreciate, the complexities of a book and what an author is doing without necessarily even really enjoying it too, which I think is also really interesting. All right. So I think that will do it for today then. Thank you for joining us. We've actually, I think, had some of our most live viewers this episode. So that's great. Thank you for joining us today. And thank you for all of your comments that you have left. And keep leaving them if you're watching this, after it's aired. But other than that, we will get out of here. Thank you so much, all of you, for your help. And we'll be back next month.
All right. Thanks.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.